In the 1970s and 1980s, the secret services of 6 South American countries, Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, Bolivia and Brazil, operated under the code name Operation Condor, with the support of the United States, with the aim of persecuting and killing left-wing political and opposition forces worldwide. To a lesser extent, the secret services of Peru, Colombia and Venezuela were also involved in the operations. Almost all of the countries involved were ruled by military dictatorships or right-wing authoritarian regimes at the beginning of the secret operation. It ended in the individual countries at the latest with their transition to democracy. The effective legal processing of these crimes only got underway at the beginning of the 21st century and continues to this day. In the 1970s and 1980s, most of South America was a dangerous place to be for those that leaned towards the left of the political spectrum. Anyone who was regarded as an intellectual, or acted as a union leader, in fact, anyone in a position to rally people to their side, and challenge the political parties of certain states, was a target. With much of the power on the continent held by military dictators, dissidents were suppressed with the threat of torture and death. These regimes shared common political opponents, so, in 1974, the heads of the intelligence agencies of Chile, Uruguay, Argentina, Paraguay and Bolivia met with the leader of Chile's secret police, Manuel Contreras, to draw up a plan, Operation Condor. Named after the world's largest carrion bird, Condor was officially a mandate that allowed each country to target political exiles and aimed groups across their borders. But it ultimately extended to families and friends of dissidents, political activists, teachers, and more. Thousands were kidnapped, tortured, and murdered, and behind the scenes was the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, providing financial, covert, and even military support for the regimes of Chilean dictator General Augusto Pinochet and his allies. The CIA's goal was to subvert communism in South America at all costs, and gain leverage for U.S. business interests where it could, even if that meant lending its tacit support to military juntas, and overlooking the oppression and murder of innocent people. Orlando Letelier, Chilean ambassador to the United States, member of the Chilean Socialist Party, and concentration camp survivor, was Augusto Pinochet's most powerful and outspoken critic. This made him a prime target, and on the 21st of September 1976, Chile's secret police, the Direction of National Intelligence, DINA, was emboldened by a covert agreement with high-level U.S. intelligence officials to operate beyond its borders. As Letelier drove through the embassy district in Washington, D.C., a plastic bomb hidden underneath his car exploded. The force of the blast went up into the driver's seat, killing Letelier and his U.S. co-worker Ronnie Carpen Moffett, while Moffat's husband, in the back seat, was injured. This was neither the first, nor the last politically motivated assassination by General Pinochet's regime, but it was the first of its kind on U.S. soil. The hit had been ordered by Pinochet, and the perpetrator was professional assassin Michael Townley, a U.S. expatriate working for the DINA, who led a team of anti-Castro Cuban exiles. There are strong indications the CIA, though it had no direct involvement in the bombing, knew about the assassination order many weeks in advance. Yet the agency did nothing to try to stop it. This period in history, known as the Cold War, is characterized by the nuclear arms race between the Soviet Union and the US, portentous political speeches, and tense standoffs in the streets of Berlin, and the waters around Cuba, but like an iceberg, the Cold War had a lot more going on beneath the surface. The CIA took an active role in preserving democracy, and stamping out the biggest political bogeyman of the day, communism, but if the former had to be sacrificed in the name of the latter, so be it. In fact, the US has a long history of helping to shape the political fates of other countries, even before the CIA played its part in propping up Pinochet's regime. In 1946, the School of the Americas was established in the U.S.-run Panama Canal Zone as the Latin American Training Center, Ground Division, ostensibly to school local brass in the U.S. methods of warfare. In the aftermath of the Cuban Revolution, the school's remit changed dramatically, and military figures from across Latin America, some of them future dictators, would go to learn the brutal counterinsurgency techniques that could help the U.S. hold back the red tide they saw around every corner. At around the same time, that voices were raised in protest on the streets of Cuba's capital, Havana. Guatemala was enjoying the fruits of freedom, having shrugged off dictator Jorge Ubico and the shackles that U.S. business the United Fruit Company imposed on the people in 1946. The new Guatemalan government redistributed land to farmers, gave power to unions, and created literacy programs. President Juan Arévalo's politics were capitalist, but the move away from the political right both alarmed the U.S., and put a huge dent in a business that had profited enormously from slavish labor practices. The CIA recruited dozens of opponents to Arévalo, denounced Guatemala, and spread propaganda that the country had been infiltrated by communists. Then, in 1954, a CIA-backed invasion led by exiled Lieutenant Colonel Carlos Castillo Armas overthrew the government, and installed Armas as president. This was a turning point for the White House. Despite international criticism, the power brokers on White House were starting to see how the CIA could be used to subvert other nations, where diplomatic sweet-talking, aid and rebukes failed. Someone else had made the same observation. Ernesto Che Guevara, who escaped from Guatemala City, and went on to join the Cuban Revolution as Castro's right-hand man, traveling to Latin America and Africa as a freewheeling agent of insurrection. In the 2 decades leading to the 1974 meeting in Chile, military juntas spread like a virus across the Caribbean and the cone of South America. In the same year as the Armas coup, General Alfredo Stroessner seized power in Paraguay, then either ensured he was the only candidate in 30 years of elections or rigged them. In Brazil, President João Goulart was overthrown by General Olimpio Mourão Filho in 1964, and in 1971, anti-communist General Hugo Bonser wore his political nemesis, President Juan José Torres, down with a series of coups that won him the dictatorship of Bolivia. In Uruguay, President Juan María Bordaberry orchestrated a civic-military coup in June 1973, and Pinochet took control of Chile 3 months later. This apparent domino effect was no coincidence. If the Central Intelligence Agency wasn't wielding the might of the U.S. budget to directly fund the juntas, supplying them with arms, spreading propaganda, or feeding them vital intelligence, then it was keeping a covert eye on the situation as it unfolded, and intervening only if it looked like the Reds were in danger of getting the upper hand. This was certainly the case in Haiti in 1958, where the self-appointed president for life François Papa Doc Duvalier quelled an uprising with CIA support. Despite reservations about its dictatorial ruler, who increasingly styled himself after the voodoo spirit, or Lord of Death, Baron Samedi, the proximity of the island to Cuba and Papa Doc's anti-Castro sentiment meant the US would condone the awful status quo in Haiti as long as it remained a frontline buffer against communism. Duvalier and his successor went on to murder tens of thousands, and plunged a once prosperous country into poverty. Agent Daniel Mitrione had been operating in Brazil, for much of the time between 1960 and 1967, where President João Goulart was doing his best to make sweeping social-economic reforms to spread wealth and promote education. As a man with considerable private finances, President Goulart was anti-communist, but leaned to the political left. Too far to the left for the liking of U.S. foreign policy advisor Henry Kissinger, who sent teams of psychological warfare agents to spread malicious rumors and misinformation about Goulart, softening Brazil up in preparation for a military coup. While the propaganda took hold, the CIA began communicating with senior executive Jack Burford of the Hanna Mining Company, which had stakes in Brazil's mineral companies. Burford traveled to Brazil for a secret meeting with Goulart, one that would line the Brazilian president's pockets, and profit both the US and Hanna Mining, but Goulart rejected the deal. Thus, President Lyndon Johnson greenlit the coup to overthrow João Goulart, and he was duly exiled by Brazil's generals under the shadow of a nearby US Navy task force. Mitrione stayed behind, to help remove remaining Goulart supporters, and assist Brazilian police in the interrogation techniques, in which he excelled. He was then sent to Uruguay in 1969, where he honed his skills by allegedly torturing beggars, that he snatched off the streets, deploying his methods, even against pregnant women with the clinical efficiency of a surgeon. Manuel Javier Cosculluela, a Cuban double agent, worked for the CIA under Mitrione's supervision, often observing him. Cosculluela later wrote about his experiences when he returned to Cuba. There was no interrogation, only a demonstration of the effects of different voltages, on the different parts of the human body, as well as demonstrating the use of a drug, which induces vomiting, I don't know why or what for, and another chemical substance. The four of them died. Cosculluela also described some of the twisted torture theories that Mitrione discussed with him. First came the softening up phase of beating and insults, no questions asked, followed by relentless beatings. Then the interrogation began. The precise pain, in the precise place, in the precise amount, for the desired effect, was Mitrione's method. You must always leave him some hope, a distant light. It may be good to prolong the session a little, to apply another softening up, he continued. Not to extract information now, but only as a political measure, to create a healthy fear of meddling in subversive activities. The people of Argentina, arguably suffered more than any other South American country, as a result of Operation Condor, with its death toll peaking at 3 times Chile's estimated 10,000 murder victims. Even before the Argentinian dictator Jorge Videla took over in 1976, with the support of the CIA, and the blessing of U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Videla was waging what was known as the Dirty War against the Argentinian people as a senior military officer. The targets of his death squads included Marxists, left-wing activists, and supporters of Argentina's previous, democratically elected, president. His junta perpetrated a cultural genocide against students, priests, union members, artists, and academics, waged inside concentration camps, where Mitrione's methods were practiced daily. Tales of abuse and torture were rife from the surviving victims. In 1979, Videla described the victims as not dead or alive, just disappeared, and indeed, many who went missing during this time have never been accounted for, and are presumed dead. The CIA was complicit in this dirty war, and Henry Kissinger had been well aware of the Argentinian military's tactics since 1970. By 1976, U.S. Congress had become concerned about the human rights abuses, and was considering sanctions against Argentina. In a recently declassified transcript, Kissinger sought to reassure the visiting Argentinian foreign minister, Admiral Cesar Augusto Gazzetti, that he had full U.S. backing. "I have an old-fashioned view, that friends ought to be supported," said Kissinger. "What is not understood in the United States is, that you have a civil war. We read about human rights problems, but not the context. The quicker you succeed the better. The human rights problem is a growing one. We want a stable situation. We won't cause you unnecessary difficulties. If you can finish before Congress gets back, the better. Whatever freedoms you could restore would help." In 1999, U.S. President Bill Clinton ordered the declassification and release of thousands of documents confirming that the CIA had intimate knowledge of Operation Condor, and even some indirect involvement in the state-sanctioned murders and atrocities committed by Southern Cone juntas. The documents also showed that the CIA and the State Department had the intelligence to prevent the assassination of Orlando Letelier, among others, but allowed it to happen anyway. Strictly speaking, Operation Condor was a success, for a time. Through a campaign of merciless repression, and active elimination of political foes, the juntas of 6 Latin American countries held communism at bay. The US leadership at the time was able to show how it was winning the war against the Reds, and at the same time support US business interests abroad, boosting its economy. But even without pragmatic hindsight, it was clearly unsustainable. The interpretation of a communist had gone from far left-wing political activists, and urban guerrillas opposed to the regime, to people with views that didn't align with state ideology, to the friends and families of those people regardless of their political opinions. Pinochet and company were throwing the baby out with the bathwater in order to maintain absolute control. Inevitably, as international attention focused on the horror unfolding across South America, the CIA pulled funding and support as the US weighed up the risk of being associated with human rights atrocities. By 1989, with the end of Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega's regime, and the fall of the Iron Curtain, Condor came to an end. The CIA brushed another of its sordid engagements under the carpet, and for a while, that's where it stayed. I would like to know what you think about this. Do you think the job of the secret services is important? Or does this idea frighten you? Do you evaluate one secret service differently from others? Feel free to write your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so that you don't miss the videos we have published in the past, and will publish in the future. Goodbye, and see you in another video, on another topic.